Hi, I'm Jonathan.
I'm Ashley, and we are Tiny Shiny Home.
Our family is building an off-grid desert homestead from the ground up using local soil to fill mesh bags and construct our own unique natural buildings.
This is called Hyperadobe, and after laying thousands of earth bags, publishing hundreds of videos, experimenting and learning, we're starting to see it become more and more popular.
But we're seeing a lot of buildings that are missing core earth bag concepts, and as a result, we're a little worried about people's safety.
How do you design Hyperadobe structures that are efficient? How do you make sure they're engineered to stand the test of time? How do you account for doors, windows, roofs, and utilities?
Today, we're deep diving and breaking down all those foundational earth bag concepts. By the end, you should have all the tools you need to design and build your own Hyperadobe dream home safely and effectively.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Let's do this.
While we think Hyperadobe is a sustainable, fantastic, and cost-effective way to build, the truth is the walls you're building are going to be like 10 times heavier than a normal house.
If those walls fail, the results can be catastrophic.
So the mantra of this video is going to be respect the walls. A couple of things before we get started. Number one, most of this information isn't necessarily new or some kind of secret. We're building on decades of research and experimentation from others in the earthbag world like Nadir Khalili of the Cal Earth Institute, Kaki Hunter, and Donald Kiffmeyer, who literally wrote the book on earthbag building, and of course, Fernando Pacheco, who pioneered the Hyperadobe method. We just want to make sure we give credit where credit is due.
Yes, and number two, we are not going to show any failed Hyperadobe experiments or projects. Our goal here is not to point fingers or blame somebody.
We all make mistakes. We're all experimenting. The reason that we're making this video is specifically because there's not that much information online about how to build with Hyperadobe safely, right?
Right.
Yeah. Number three, we aren't licensed engineers or architects, so all of this is just our opinions. Please don't take this as legally binding or code compliant advice. Again, we're just trying to help share this information so that everybody can build safely.
If you'd like to save all this information, you can download this beautifully crafted PDF that Jonathan designed, and it's free.
It's free. tinyshinyhome.com/hyperadobe-safety. Throw in your email address. We'll send it right over to you. And one more thing, if you want to know where to get these Hyperadobe bags, hyperadobe.com. Easy to remember. You can buy them online, ship them straight to you. But we'll get to that later. Cool?
Cool.
Okay, let's get started. Earthbag building was pioneered by Nadir Khalili of the Cal Earth Institute, using sandbags and barbed wire to create monolithic dome structures resistant to fire and earthquakes. He further improved it by implementing Superadobe, or long tubes of enclosed polypropylene bag material that gets filled with earth, moistened, and then tamped into a formed adobe brick.
Think of this process like a huge 3D printer, only you are the printer, laying each course and building the walls layer by layer.
Nearly 30 years later, Fernando Pacheco developed the Hyperadobe earthbag method. This focuses on building vertical walls using a rational knitted fabric, kind of like what you'd see fruit packaged in at the grocery store, but better.
Not only does this mean you're using a fraction of the plastic material around the dirt, but it costs less, and you don't need barbed wire between the layers because the open netting allows the material from the lower layer to lock into the new layer above.
We've been furiously experimenting the last 6 years with Hyperadobe, building a solar shed office, a large outdoor chicken garden, a small composting toilet outhouse, an outdoor shower, benches, and planters, and we've taken everything we've learned from those projects to design this huge 2,500 square foot roundhouse for our family. Through that process, we have learned that Hyperadobe earthbags have a number of benefits.
They use localized, cost-effective natural materials like sand, rocks, and clay. The thick walls create thermal efficiency and thermal mass transfer.
They're fire resistant, wind resistant. They're pretty much bulletproof. Earthen walls are breathable, and using natural materials creates a safe home free of chemicals and their long-term effects. While there is a lot of physical labor involved, anyone can do it without fancy or expensive tools.
Built properly, earthen buildings can last for hundreds or even thousands of years. And it's just a therapeutic way of construction. You get to hang out with your friends and family. There's fresh air and sunshine. It's a fantastic community builder.
By the way, if you're having trouble visualizing the steps of laying Hyperadobe, we couldn't squeeze all that into this class, but we do have the ultimate guide to Hyperadobe, which we'll link right here. You can go watch and learn Hyperadobe step by step. Now, some might say that using plastic to encase the earth kind of defeats the purpose of natural building, but decades of research have gone into this, and there are a number of reasons that this method is used. Number one, safety is a huge concern while building. Earthbag walls can take a long time to build, and during this time, they're exposed to the elements. Heavy rains, wind, and snow can all erode or oversaturate sections of the wall, especially if not filled with the right mixture. Plastic is used as a temporary stabilizer to keep everyone safe on the job site while the project is in progress.
It also allows you to form each section of wall in a consistent way to create beautiful shapes that are structurally sound. And finally, at least in the case of Hyperadobe, the actual amount of plastic being used is very minimal.
For example, our entire Roundhouse used 9 rolls of Hyperadobe, or about 360 pounds of plastic. But in America, each person throws away about 300 pounds of plastic trash a year. Plus, Hyperadobe is UV treated so it won't break down or cause microplastics. Once it's roofed and plastered, it becomes inert and just silently stays there.
For us, Hyperadobe has put the power back in our hands to build a beautiful, functional family home with minimal environmental impact.
But we want to make sure we're doing it as safely as possible.
Sure.
So, let's get into the basics.
Now, one of the most attractive things about building with earth bags is using local soil to build with. The caveat being that it really does matter what type of soil you have on site.
Some people refer to this building method as sandbags, but to be clear, sand has no structural properties without a binder. And the actual Hyperadobe bag material isn't structural either. It's just holding the material in place until it hardens.
Now, before you build, you really do need to know what kind of soil you have on site.
Right. There's a few ways to do this. There are plenty of videos on YouTube about doing what's called a jar test, where you dig down past your topsoil, you get soil underneath, you put it in a jar with some water, a clear mason jar, shake it up, and you let it sit a couple of days, and you see how it layers out, and then you kind of mark it and figure out what that percentage is. Where you don't want to go through all that, you can just send your soil off for site testing. What you'll find is a mix of sand, clay, rocks, and silt. Sand is essentially tiny, sharp shards of ground-up rocks. Clay is a little like interconnected platelets that grow and link together when water is present. Rocks are rocks, and silt is the wild card you gotta watch out for. These are basically like tiny little ball bearings that won't stick to anything. So as you start to fill and compact your bag, you can start to see why each of these individual pieces is important.
The sharp bits of sand glue themselves into the clay binder, and the rocks provide larger, super hard chunks for everything to push against as you compress it together.
For maximum safety, your wall fill material should have at least 30% clay. Any less than that, and things start to have trouble sticking together and holding as a single brick. Many also recommend adding 5 to 10% of Portland cement, especially to your foundation layers, headers and bond beam layers, and around any forms that will be removed later. This can be helpful if your site soil is low in clay and you need more binder.
Now, you do need to be careful about if your site soil has too much clay. Not only will it be incredibly difficult to fill with a sticky, gooey mix, but rain events can come and then the walls become unstable until they dry out again.
So basically, don't go over 50% clay is probably a good rule of thumb. Now, we've built a bunch of buildings here. We've tried a bunch of mixes. We're going to share exactly what those were and how well they worked.
First was our solar shed. We started with our native soil. It was a mix of 90% sand and about 10% clay, so there wasn't enough binder. We added 10% Portland cement to help the bags become solid. Now, when I just said that out loud, it made me think that you might expect our shed to be falling down or something because of our mix isn't exactly what we just said.
Sure. Yeah. It was our first building. It was an experiment.
We learned a lot.
We did. And I think that we've learned since that there are better mixes, but also it kind of speaks to the fact that earthbag building is a little bit forgivable. Like, you can push things a little bit, you can change your mixes a little bit. But the goal with this class or this guide is to give you best practices because the walls are so heavy. Remember, respect the walls. We want to make sure that people have a good starting foundation because you got to know what the rules are to break the rules.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I think there's also, a lot of times we say there's good, better, and best. And I think the shed was good.
It was good. It was okay. Yeah.
But we can do better.
So let's talk about the Casa de Caca. or our composting toilet outhouse. Now, this building, we decided we didn't want to use cement because we were going into the whole composting theme, right? We're reusing materials. We didn't want to bring in Portland into the mix. So what did we do?
Well, I went to our local gravel yard, and they have a waste material from when they wash all their rock and their sand. They have all this clay left over.
So for that building, we used our native soil, which remember was 90% sand, 10% clay, and we amended it with extra clay to get closer to the 30% in it, and it worked great.
Yeah.
But I will say that the magic mix that we have found is closer to 1/3 rock, 1/3 clay, and 1/3 sand.
This is also called AB or aggregate base. It is readily available at pretty much any gravel yard. Adding just a little bit of water and tamping locks this up quickly and it becomes hard as a brick.
Now, the other mixes did get hard, but they took a lot longer. Like, usually we would only lay one layer per day because it would be too soft to walk on, which gets pretty dangerous if you're up high on a wall and when you step, it like squishes and, the edges start to fail. So one reason we really like this AB mix is that we can go quickly and it's super solid and you can walk on it almost immediately after tamping. So after all that, our sort of recommendation, if you want to build something as quickly as possible and as strong as possible, is just to have that AB mix delivered directly to you. It's perfectly pre-mixed. Add 5 or 10% Portland depending on the wall to really make it super stabilized. And you don't have to think about it. You don't have to do all that mixing yourself. It really speeds things up.
Yeah, but if you do want to use your local soil, that is great. Just do a couple test bags to really make sure that you have the mix locked in.
Make sure you got enough binder and bring in binder if you need it. Yeah, just do those test bags. Don't take our word for it.
Now, one of the things we love about Hyperadobe is just about anybody can do it. Overall, there's very little danger on a work site like this, but we want to make sure we cover our bases.
For shovels and pickaxes, be careful where you're swinging them. Don't swing a pickaxe at your feet. For cement mixers, don't stick your hands in there while it's turning. Keep your loose-fitting clothes or long hair or necklaces away from the spinning paddles.
When Portland cement is dry, it is very toxic. Don't breathe it in, wear a mask, and safety glasses. With wheelbarrows, these can often be hard to control when the material is dumped into them. A double wheel wheelbarrow provides more stability.
Let's talk about tamping, because this is probably the most physically demanding part of the job. Not only is it one way you could potentially get hurt the easiest over time because you have to tamp the entire thing, every single row. But also, if you don't compress it, then you're losing all the strength in your building. If you're just putting loose soil in a bag, that's not structural, right?
Right.
So you have to spend all this time and all this physical abuse on your body to compress the top and the sides to make sure it holds.
And there's definitely ways that you can do this to where it's not such a toll on your body, and it's important that we learn those.
Right, so here's where we start. When you tamp, make sure that you don't tamp from waist high. I did that on the solar shed, hurt my shoulder a lot. When you're tamping up high, it puts too much stress on the upper part of your arms, your neck, and your shoulders. It's bad. Don't do that. Always stand on the wall, put the tamp out in front of you, and lift straight up and down.
And you're letting the tamp do most of the work.
You are most of the time, yeah. But the big thing is when you come down, you want to make sure you're releasing your hands right at the end. Not too much, because if you do too much, it could bounce and it could fall off the wall or it could come back and hit you. But just a little bit so that you don't jar all of the joints in your body, which I have totally done. It's no good, and especially if you're doing it over and over and over and over and over again, that can really compound and start to create injuries. And finally, when you're tamping, make sure you put the tamp far enough out. Do not lean over so that the tamp is right under your face or your head, because you could hit, it could bounce, it could come up and knock you, and you could potentially lose your balance and fall off the wall. It's a whole thing. So just make sure you're straight in front of it, you're out far enough, you release that when you tamp, and you're going to go a long way.
You're going to go a long way?
I am going to go a long way. Now let's talk about the last, most dangerous part is once you get high enough, scaffolding gets involved.
Now you're lifting heavy buckets of material over people's heads. There's tamps and dolly carts up on the wall. Scaffolding themselves need to be supported and braced properly. And of course, when people are 10 foot high on a 16-inch wall, The danger of falling increases exponentially.
So another function of having these scaffoldings up as high as possible is you move them as you move down the wall, so that if the person on the wall does start to lose their balance, they have a place to go without getting injured.
Yeah. Ideally on both sides of the wall, if possible.
If you can. Yes, that is definitely good. So these are all things you just need to keep in mind as you're building. Take it slow, stay safe. All safe buildings begin with a strong foundation. And unfortunately, in this earthbag world, this is a step that a lot of people like to skip.
Yeah.
Maybe because they're building with earth and they think, well, we'll just throw it straight on the ground and everything will be fine.
It might be fine for a few years, but we've seen some things that have us concerned.
Guys, we've seen some things.
We have seen a lot of things.
If there's anything we've learned in our last 6 years here, ground prep is vital to the long-term success and safety of the project. Desert sand in particular has a bad habit of settling or sinking. Sheet flowing water or erosion can be a big issue. Look, earthbag buildings are a ton of work, and the last thing you want is the foundation or rushing water and erosion to ruin all the work that you've done.
There are a few ways to approach this. For non-critical buildings like a small shed or a secondary structure, you should only need to dig for a rubble trench where the walls will actually go. For larger buildings, you'll want to raise up, level, and compact the area before digging any of your trenches, but we'll get to that in a minute. You may be wondering, why start your walls in a trench?
First, this is a great way to use the natural strength of the earth to give your bags a toehold in the foundation. It's basically like you're creating a huge anchor in the ground. Second, it creates an opportunity to find level even on a sloped area so that you're starting the bags properly. You don't want the foundation bags to be wobbly or unlevel. This is a pretty basic building requirement, but you'd be surprised how many sort of dug out trenches or areas we've seen where they weren't leveled. And so you start laying and eventually layer after layer after layer,
just compounds.
It compounds and it really catches up with you. So take the time, make that level in the trench.
Third, you can add drainage and compaction in the trench by adding drainage rock.
This is often called a rubble trench. Again, it's a pretty basic building technique, but it works great for earthbag walls. You should use at least 5 inches of large diameter gravel to help make sure you don't end up with water pooling around the lower bags. By tamping it into place, the rocks can lock into each other and provide a more solid foundation than sand. It will continue to strengthen and compact as more layers are added.
Now, when you're creating your trenches, it's important to go about 4 to 6 inches wider than the tamped size of your bag because you're going to be getting in there with your hands and really moving things around. You want to have room to do that.
The goal is to get at least 2 to 3 layers in the ground on your shallowest side. So if you include 5 inches of gravel and 10 to 15 inches of bags, that would be 15 to 20 inches down. Now, depending on where you live and your climate and your clay content, that all could change. So you really have to do your own research into your specific area. Our frost line's only 12 inches here. So we don't have to go down that far to worry about freezing if water pooled under the bags.
Right, and it's also important to note that our soil is mostly sand. So if you have clay-heavy soil, you may want a deeper trench and more gravel.
Right, because the clay is going to hold that water. So you want more buffer for that water to infiltrate down into the rocks and not come up into the wall. Also, by doing this, you're essentially creating a footing like you would see in a concrete pad. So we definitely recommend stabilizing these layers underground with a full 10% of Portland cement while you're laying them.
Now, for permanent buildings or homes, we do recommend adding a few extra steps.
First, you should clear, raise, level, and compact the whole area before doing anything. How high do you need to build up? It's really going to depend, again, on your specific situation. So you'll need to look into 100-year, 1,000-year flood events. You're going to need to see what your county recommends. Might even be worth talking to local gravel yards or concrete companies.
Or even neighbors that have been here for several years.
Yes. You want to make sure that you are building up enough so that if there is some sort of big event, you don't have water coming in your main doorways, right?
Yeah.
Besides potential for flooding, building up that foundation, leveling and compacting it is an important step because large earthbag buildings are going to be really heavy and you want a solid base to build on.
Anytime a concrete pad is poured, they're going to do the exact same thing. Clear the area, build it up, water it down, and compact it. Once that's done, you'll then proceed the same way with the trenches. You're just digging them out of the foundation instead of the native soil.
Second, for maximum longevity, consider vapor barriers and rodent barriers. Stabilized soil is strong, but mice, rats, gophers, and all the other underground pests can still chew right through it. We know of several specific instances where earthbag buildings are being overrun with rodents digging tunnels through the walls. This is usually when the walls are buried, but we've even heard stories of people starting Hyperadobe walls, getting them up like knee-high, leaving for the summer and coming back, and again, rodent holes everywhere.
To combat this, we use heavy-duty metal 1/4-inch hardware cloth fully wrapped around the lower layers and up at least 2 layers above ground. You need to go as small as possible with the holes in the hardware cloth because if a mouse can get his nose through it, it can squeeze the rest of its body through. When installing, you just cut the pieces and overlap them as you go down the line to keep the barrier secure.
We talked about with the rubble trench earlier, having that drainage gravel underneath your bags helps with water. But what happens when it rains and it hits the outside of your building and it rolls down into the ground, and then it could potentially do the same thing. It could wick up inside that. We've seen that in 10 to 15-year-old Cal Earth buildings, so we know that it can happen.
A heavy-duty vinyl vapor barrier can help keep your foundation bags nice and dry. The hardware cloth should be the outermost layer and the vapor barrier inside it.
The most annoying part of this process is that when you're not laying earth bags, you have to re-wrap your footing to prevent rains filling up the vapor barrier and saturating the bag. So it just becomes a lot of wrapping and re-wrapping every time you work on it.
As you get to the floor level of your bags, you'll want to fold and tie down both hardware cloth and vapor barrier along the edges, leaving some space in the middle for the Hyperadobe bags to connect to the next layer. And finally, for safety, backfill around all those trenches. The space around each side of the bag is a great way to twist your ankle when walking around on the job site.
The first thing to keep in mind when designing your house is that circular structures are stronger than straight walls.
Round is sound.
You can create huge diameter vertical walls without any additional support because gravity will pull the wall in, but it's stabilized against itself because of the shape. Straight walls are definitely still possible, but you have to buttress every 10 feet. This means a small perpendicular wall, at least 3 to 4 feet long, that locks into the foundation and interlocks all the way up.
Buttresses should also be around any door openings whenever possible to help support that larger hole. Also, if you're smart about your design, a buttress can even be an interior wall. It doesn't always have to point towards the outside. Every time a wall or buttress comes in contact with each other, the layers get overlapped or interlocked. This happens every other layer for maximum strength, ensuring that all wall joints are connected in a way that it cannot separate or fail.
Now, as you build these walls up, keeping them plumb is one of the most important things that you can do. In fact, we prioritize plumbness over each layer being perfectly level, because if the wall starts stepping in or out, that's where things can get really dangerous. The good version of this is when you're standing on top of that wall and you're tamping, you just use your side tamps to tamp the layer you're on exactly to the plumbness of the layer below it. But you can also use like a 4 or 6 foot level when you start getting tall.
I'd say that's the best method.
That's the best method for sure.
Also, you're going to want to pay attention to your seams. Even though you can lay very long, unbroken sections of wall with Hyperadobe, there can be instances where a section is just too long to lay all at once. In those cases, you're going to want to stop the bag and start again. As you build up layers, make sure those seams are staggered. If all your seams are in the exact same place, you've created a super weak point in that wall. So just stop them, start them in different areas all along that wall.
All right, quick side quest. You might be wondering about domes. We don't currently recommend domes with Hyperadobe because the bag is too stretchy and it doesn't create the proper torsion or tightness for barbed wire to lock into. We love domes and we think they're beautiful, but here in the desert, we need to shade buildings and catch rainwater, so that's why we're focused on Hyperadobe. It's perfect for building plumb vertical walls without barbed wire, so you can put whatever kind of roof over it you want. You can totally do vertical walls with Hyperadobe bags too, it's just more expensive and it still requires that barbed wire. If you're building in an earthquake-heavy area, the barbed wire is important to that structural tensile strength, so Hyperadobe might make more sense for you in that scenario.
As far as sizing goes, we've actually built a lot of earthbag buildings with this Hyperadobe Roundhouse being the largest. It's definitely pushing the boundaries of what we can do with this technology. Keep in mind, for every 1 foot of linear bag, you're looking at about 120 pounds of material. The bigger and taller you're building, the exponentially heavier and more difficult it gets.
From a footprint standpoint, you can definitely build large Hyperadobe buildings, especially if they're circular. But I would tell you, as your future friend, that maybe you should go smaller and simpler.
Yeah, burnout is a real thing. We reached that point about lintel height on this build, and that created, this whole thing of do we continue or do we stop? And that's when we reached out to our community and we got some help with the Rumble.
We're just telling you, we don't want to squash your dreams, but we're just kind of telling you from experience, your best chance of success is going to be a smaller earthbag building. The less dirt you have to move, the more chance you are going to get it done.
But again, people want to dream big and do unique things. I know. It's like a hard balance of don't sacrifice your dreams, but also maybe start a little bit smaller. Maybe there's a way that you could build it where you could add on later.
Well, and this goes back to testing. We built a bunch of small earthbag buildings before we attempted anything like this. So maybe you should build something small before you just go full-fledged into a 2,000 square foot house. That'll give you a much better idea if it's something you want to do.
But maybe you're super motivated and you just want to create an awesome, huge house. And so who are we to tell you not to do that?
We're like those overprotective parents that are supportive, but also we're like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't do that.
You gotta let them learn.
Now, let's talk about how high you can go with earth bags. The width of the bag is going to correlate directly to how high you can go safely with the wall.
8-inch bags. Don't use these for anything super structural. They're great for planters, small decorative walls, and accents. Don't go higher than 4 feet with these. 12-inch bags. These are best used in very small buildings or as internal walls that won't be supporting anything. Don't go higher than 8 foot with these, but keep in mind that this width is very hard to walk on, and a dolly system won't fit.
16-inch bags. We find these to be the real sweet spot for building. They give you great thermal mass, massive structural strength, plenty of width to walk on and put a dolly bucket on. We've gone up to 12 feet high with these and feel like that's about as far as you'd want to go. 18-inch bags. These are great for foundations or heavy-duty retaining walls. They're much harder to work with because of the extra weight, and they don't fit well on the dolly bucket system. With that extra width, you could go higher than 12 feet, but I still feel like I would like to see a lot of that in the ground. So maybe it's sunken down in a few more feet, or I don't know. I would like to have a better toe hold if you're going higher than 12 feet, personally.
Yeah.
That's just me. Speaking of going really tall, what we see a lot of times is people approach earthbag design like they would a traditional house, and they start designing 2-story buildings.
I feel like this is kind of a bad idea for multiple reasons, especially in our area. It would be super hard to heat and cool that big of a space.
Right. And we have crazy winds here. And really just think about if you're building, especially a building that's got straight walls and you're going up 20 feet, how do you even buttress up that high?
Yeah.
It gets sketchy and it gets dangerous really quick.
Maybe just keep your design a little bit more simple.
That being said, we have seen examples of earthbag buildings that are circular, that do 1 story, a huge bomb beam, and then a 2nd story. And we've seen earthbag buildings that do the first floor in earthbags, pour a concrete bomb beam, and then build traditionally on top of that.
We've also seen post and beam self-supporting roofs that go up 2 stories. And that way the earthbags can go higher and don't have to support the entire roof structure or the 2nd floor.
Either way, as you'll quickly learn, once you get up about 5 feet, the whole process of laying earthbags changes. Scaffoldings get involved, the process gets a lot more dangerous, it slows way down. So that's just another reason we don't recommend going super high, is because it starts taking way longer.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, a half-finished earthbag building is useless to everyone. So you know what? Our whole goal here is to really give you all the information you need to have a successful build.
Life would be much easier laying earthbags if you didn't have to have openings, but houses are always going to need windows and doors. One thing that makes Hyperadobe walls so strong is you get to lay these long, unbroken layers that all lock into each other. But adding openings means you're breaking that connection. Remember, like we said earlier, straight earthbag walls need buttressing every 10 feet and around large openings. So any door opening on a straight wall should have a buttress on at least one side. Since you're taking a 7-foot tall chunk out of the wall, you have to make sure that you're supporting that hole properly.
The buttresses should come out at least 3 to 4 feet at the bottom, interlock every other layer, and can get shorter as they get higher. We recommend bringing it up to the top of the opening, especially on larger buildings.
For the opening itself, you're going to want to build a wooden form to fill that space, and there are 2 ways to approach this. Number 1 is a temporary form. This is made out of plywood and 2x4s to be as cheap as possible since it will be removed later. You want to build it deep enough so the bags can push right up against the side without wrapping around the edges, and in a way where you can access your screws to disassemble them for removal later.
While laying your earth bags, you should put in Velcro strips or cleats to hold the forms in place. These are strips of plywood with nails going up and down, and a 2x4 on the edge. The nails and the weight of the bag will essentially lock the 2x4 permanently for mounting later. At minimum, put one at the bottom, one in the middle, and one at the top so there's 3 points of contact.
Additionally, you should brace the form horizontally so it doesn't bow in towards the middle as you tamp, and when installing the form, you should check for level and plumb, screw your bottom cleat in, and then put in angled supports down to the ground to keep the form from moving in or out while building your earthbag wall. One more thing to keep in mind, this is a temporary form, so it's going to get removed later, and then you'll put in a permanent frame that you'll attach your window and door to. So when you build a form, you have to think ahead. For instance, a standard 3-foot door is 36 inches by 80 inches, which means the rough opening is 38 inches by 82.5 inches. But if you're taking your form out and adding a 2x frame back in for mounting, then you have to add 3 inches to the sides and 1.5 inches to the top. Otherwise, you won't have room in the opening to build your frame back in. So the temporary form would need to be 41 inches by 84 inches.
Number 2 is a permanent frame. In this approach, you're going to build your final frame directly into the earthbag walls. So instead of a cheap plywood form, you're looking at a much more expensive, heavier duty frame. In our door example, you would build it to the rough opening size of 38 by 82.5. But you'll likely need to double bucket, which means instead of a single 2x12, you'll have 2 stacked next to each other. You would build the entire frame to an outer dimension of 43 by 85.5. and an inner dimension of the roof opening.
The reason for this is that the wood can bow over time, especially as you are tamping on that. So even with, your bracing that goes across, if this is going to be your final form, you want to make sure that it is super strong and it's not going to bend or warp, because then you won't be able to fit your door and window in if it gets messed up. You're still going to need to use cleats at the bottom, middle, and top, and those diagonal support places to keep it plumb while building. There's pros and cons to both approaches. With a permanent frame, you're only building it once, and you build it to the rough opening size, you build the walls around it, and that's it.
Yeah, and you're only buying that wood one time.
But depending on how long that build takes, that wood is getting trashed by the elements. Also, even a 2x12 isn't going to be wide enough to stop the bag from wrapping around the edges as you tamp, so it's not as clean.
Now, temporary forms may seem a little bit wasteful to some, but it has its advantages. You're building it with cheaper wood, 2x4s and plywood, and you're not having to double buck your final frame.
It all kind of works out at the end. Like, it feels like you're buying more wood, but because you're not having to buy huge 2x12s, like you could literally just put a 2x4 frame back in connected to those cleats, and at that point you're actually not buying as much wood, right?
Yeah, and maybe you have a friend that's going to build an earthbag building and you can toss those forms to them.
Exactly. You also get a cleaner tamped edge and don't have to worry about the integrity of the final wood since it's going to be new.
Now, we aren't done talking about bracing these openings.
No, you still are going to need a lintel or a header over top of the form. This is because as you continue to build the wall, the bags that go over the opening will push down on the finished frame and could break your windows or cause your doors not to open anymore. Worst case scenario, the whole thing fails and caves in.
This is actually a pretty standard construction technique for all building types. Wood-framed walls get headers like this. Masonry walls look like this.
Gravity is going to gravity either way. Now, there are a few ways to approach an earthbag lintel. The big idea is you need to build something that is strong enough to take the weight from all the layers above and make sure that the downward pressure never touches that door or window frame. For door and window openings that are 2 feet to 6 feet wide, you can accomplish this with wood and build it yourself. Create a stud pack or a group of vertically set boards, lag screwed together to form a single lintel.
When building the lintels, make them long enough so that at least 1 foot hangs over each side of the opening. This is to make sure that there's plenty of support in case the end of your earthbag fails.
While you can technically stack a bunch of 2x together, we recommend going to 4x or 6x widths as you need to build the lintel as close to full depth of the wall. The additional strength of the thicker boards and time saving of assembly are totally worth it.
When you have larger openings like this 11-foot window in our kitchen of the Roundhouse, look into steel beams or rebar reinforced headers.
I know that we said all your openings need lintels, but that isn't always true. Self-supporting arches are one of those things you look at and think, is that really going to work? Well, it turns out these architectural structures have been used for thousands of years. Catenary arches, corbelled arches, brick arches, and you can add earthbags to this list as well. It works by relying on gravity and compression to hold the shape without support, converting downward weight into outward thrust.
This can also be achieved by building your removable door form in 2 parts, a lower box and an upper arched box. Compass your arch onto some plywood and then cut the 2x4s and screw them in each side to create the shape. Leave the screws accessible so that you can take one side of plywood off and the 2x4s will then collapse as you pull it out. Also, you may want to use some loose 2x4 blocks on top of that lower box so that you can knock it out and release the tension at the top of the curve.
The counterintuitive part of the process is that you want to lay the main arched bag far enough down on the curve that it builds in enough of that compression. If you just barely go over the top, then you've lost all the strength of the arch. The main arched bag should have at least 10% cement and mixed wetter so it can really be formed into place. Sometimes this is called a super mix, where you're almost creating more of a concrete mix than an earthbag mix.
Then you'll lay the next layers up to the arch, feathering them out until you get back on track. When finished, there should be no downward pressure on anything underneath the self-supporting arch. It's kind of like magic.
All right, let's talk roofing because, building a vertical Hyperadobe wall is one thing, slapping a roof on it is a whole other thing. Hyperadobe is great at giving you a really solid base to attach whatever kind of roof you want to. So obviously we're not roof builders. We can't tell you specifically how to build the hundreds of different roofs that you could potentially put on a building like this, but we can teach you how to make sure it's connected to the earth bags.
The first thing we recommend with all the earthbag roofs is to use the weight of the bags and the hurricane straps to hold it down. With this technique, you'll use at least 5 layers of earthbag, cut your webbing long enough to go up and completely over, then use a ratcheting tool to tighten down the critical parts of the roof structure. These hurricane straps should be put every 2 to 4 feet. They should be UV resistant and make sure they're not set too close to a seam or the bag edge.
The part of the roof structure you're going to strap down is going to depend on the type of roof that you're building. For our smaller solar shed office and Casa de Caca, we use straps to hold down our main LVLs or 4x6 beams that the rafters would attach to. Part of this process also included cleats that were screwed into the earthbag walls and into the beams, but this was more just to make sure they were secure and level before strapping them down. I know we said we weren't going to tell you how to build a roof, but you're strapping down the main beam and then you would attach your rafters more like you would in a traditional house.
This can include just screwing them in to the beam temporarily, but you're always going to want to come back and add something more secure like a hurricane tie, which is a metal bracket.
Right. You need to make sure you're engineering your roof properly. You're just using the weight of the bags and those straps to hold down the critical base of the roof, if that makes sense.
The beam.
The beam. Also, speaking of beams, your top layer where that attaches should be 10% cement. You want that extra stabilized because you're going to have all that weight of the roof on top of it. Once your building gets bigger, you might need to consider a ring beam or a bond beam.
For our Roundhouse, we developed a mechanically bonded concrete ring beam that we use straps to hold down as well. This was achieved by bending a 2-foot piece of rebar into a U shape, stabbing it through the back of the bag while laying that final course, using a pair of channel locks to grab it and rotate it as the bag was let out of our bucket system. This way, it would stand up vertically with minimal tearing. The bag was tamped as normal around the rebar, then we created a 2x2 rebar cage attached to the top of the U.
To create the forms for the bond beam, we used 16-inch strips of plywood, all thread, nuts, bolts, and 2x4s to build forms. And then we brought in a pump truck to fill those forms with high-strength PSI concrete. We'll be connecting the metal bar joist to the concrete via concrete anchors, but the straps are holding down the bond beam itself, which is an integral part of the roof.
So when do you think we actually need a bond beam?
Good question. I would say if you are in the 1,500 to 2,000 square foot range for the house, or if you have spans where you have to cover like 20 feet of distance with a rafter, I would go concrete bond beam there. Otherwise, for most Hyperadobe buildings, you're doing a wooden beam and a more traditional roof should be fine.
While Hyperadobe bags are UV treated, they can't stay exposed forever. A critical part of earthbag building is the process of covering the earthbag walls with a weatherproof plaster. You might remember that we had a lot of failed exterior experiments over the years, and while we're still chasing a cement-free version of a truly weatherproof plaster, we can share with you what we know works right now.
Plastering earthbags is a 3 to 4 step process. You're not just going to be slapping a single coat on and it's finished. Part of the reason is that your plaster is usually a different mix of materials than what the mix is inside your walls. That means it's all going to expand and contract at different rates. So part of this process is to build up multiple layers that slowly transition from, say, a clay-heavy interior mix of your wall to more of a lime-heavy exterior plaster. The goal being the better the transition, the less likely the material is to crack and delaminate. Step 1 is chinking. This is where you fill in all the dips between your bags and start to even out the space between each layer. The key for all plaster layers is to use washed concrete sand. This ensures you get clean, sharp shards of sand that will actually lock into the binder. So we can speak to this directly because we did a lot of exterior plasters just with native soil, which is very sandy.
Yeah, well, it's very silty. So having unwashed sand is likely what caused our exterior plaster to fail.
Right, yeah, having clean, sharp sand is the key for everything to lock together. The base chinking mix we recommend is 4-to-1 or 80% washed concrete sand and 20% Portland cement. Add a little water, but keep it dry to fill the space between the bags and stay in place.
Anytime you're working with cement, you have to be careful not to overwork it.
There's a rule when you're working with Portland plaster where you want to touch it a maximum of 3 times. Ideally, you're only touching it twice. The third time should be an emergency because you stand a good chance of actually knocking it off the wall rather than smoothing it out. And so when you're grabbing it out of the barrel, that's the first time you're touching it. The second time you're touching it is when you're putting it on the wall. The third time you're touching it is gingerly just to make sure that, that gets smoothed out, but you're probably gonna knock out as much as you actually put off.
Any more than this and you risk breaking the vacuum seal you created, throwing it into that crack, causing air pockets and weakening the bond. Continue this until all spaces between the bags are filled.
Steps 2 and 3 are your scratch and brown coats. These move to a 3-to-1 mix, or 75% washed concrete sand and 25% cement, and it's mixed slightly wetter. The goal with these coats is to connect from one chink to the next, covering the surface of all the bags. Sometimes this requires more than one pass to fill in the valleys or dips where the bags weren't laid perfectly. It needs to be a little bit wetter so you can use the palm of your hand to kind of glide over the bags and not stick to your hand. You can also use a wood float for these steps. Step 4 is your final coat. You may want to use a finer or screened wash sand for the smoothest finish possible. Go 3-to-1 or 60% sand, 20% Portland, and 20% lime, and mix slightly wet. This process involves a steel trowel to really compress the layer into place.
A couple of other things here. Hyperadobe bags themselves actually make great laths. The mesh makes it easy for the material to adhere to, but for maximum strength and less cracking, Think about how commercial stucco is applied and consider a metal lath under the final layer. This can be connected and screwed into the scratch and brown coats, then floated right up until it's no longer visible. And finally, we've taken to painting many of our buildings with a waterproof elastomeric coating to keep water from penetrating the plaster and causing delamination.
For us, this has kind of been the last stand in our fight with the weather that we get here to protect the bags, but it definitely has its drawbacks. It decreases the breathability. It's chemically based, so it's not supernatural. You'll want to do 1 to 2 base coats with a cheaper, thicker white elastomeric, and then the final coat can be tinted to whatever you want.
If you choose to use elastomeric paint, I highly suggest that you stick with a natural interior plaster because those walls have to breathe at least one way.
Right. If you're coating the outside wall, it can't breathe or release moisture unless it comes through the inside. And if you paint it on both sides, then that's no good. You're just trapping a bunch of moisture in the wall, and none of that is good over time for anybody's health.
Yeah, and ideally, you can find a way to do line plaster on the outside so your walls are breathing both ways.
That is our next achievement to unlock. We are actively researching and educating ourselves and trying to figure it out. We've tried a bunch before. We just haven't been able to make it work, but we believe it's possible.
Yeah, just need to go to a few workshops and figure it out.
We've talked about this a lot before, but a common misconception of thick earthbag walls is that they're really insulative, but they actually have a really low R value. Earth has something called thermal mass transfer. When the sun warms the outside of the wall, it gets absorbed and slowly passes through to the inside. For our 16-inch Hyperadobe walls, we found this takes about 12 hours. That being said, if the wall isn't exposed to the sun, it's going to hold the temperature inside the building really well because it does have really thick walls and there's not really a way for it to escape.
This is why we highly recommend actual roofs.
In our climate, the best way to use this to our advantage is to build our longest wall facing south so that in the winter, the sun is absorbed and naturally warms the inside. Bonus points if you could put in clear story windows too.
In the summer, a roof overhang provides shade over the walls and the windows while the sun is at a more overhead angle, helping to keep it cool until the end of the day when the sun is low and blasting that western wall.
Now the trick is none of this really matters if your foundation or roof aren't properly insulated. For instance, during the summer, if your roof isn't insulated, it'll just transfer the heat in that way. Or in the winter, you'll lose your heat into the ground without some sort of thermal break. When you're designing, make sure that you are thinking about insulation in the floor and ceiling so that you can use the thickness of these walls to your advantage and make them as thermally efficient as possible. And of course, once you have those bases covered, you can supplement with more traditional heating and cooling sources like mini splits run off solar systems or propane or wood-based heaters.
If you've done your foundation properly, you should have a lot of options of how to do your floor. Remember back to our rubble trench example. Even then, we were thinking about where the floor would be in relation to the bags we were laying. We planned on 2 inches of insulation and a standard 5-inch concrete slab. One cool thing about earth bags encasing a concrete slab is that it helps to insulate from the outside temperature. Exposed concrete slabs will pull cold air in, but the thermal mass of earth bag walls naturally help insulate it.
For our solar shed, we did an earthen floor, but also used a layer of earth bags to bring it up to the level we wanted. There's also things in more traditional building like thermal breaks and pest control and even radiant floor heating. The truth is you could do all of those things in an earth bag house. You just got to plan ahead. Okay, we're finally winding down here. Stick with us just a little bit longer. We're going to talk about utilities, right? Because that's one thing they're like, how do you put utilities in these really thick walls? How does that even work? Again, you need to plan ahead. For plumbing, we did a full floor plan design of the house with all the fixtures in place, so we were able to design our drains and vents and integrate into the foundation before we even built the walls. This meant a lot of digging by hand, adjusting carefully for slope because we needed a really long run with the branches, and planning exactly where the pipes would go under the earth bag walls. Trying to do this later and dig out under your walls is going to be complicated. It's just better if you plan ahead, trust me.
One of our secret weapons for dealing with utilities will be framed walls. While the earthbag walls provide the main support structure, we'll be adding a lot of framed walls to create rooms, but also as a way to easily run utilities. So when stubbing up where fixtures would go, we put as many of them into the framed walls as possible. Toilets and showers obviously have to be where they actually go, but sinks, drains, laundry vents, and all those can be hidden into framed walls. The framed walls can also be used to run water, electrical, and even gas lines up into the ceiling and then down to their final location.
There are always edge cases though. It's easy to put outlets or light switches into walls with cleats and to lay the bag around them, and then you can use variable Romex stapled into the cracks or conduit to pull the wire later.
You can also add custom cabinetry, or you can do decorative things on the wall. Think of this house as an art installation. There are plenty of ways that you can hide the utilities without them looking so bad.
That is true. Now, for those things that actually need to go all the way through the wall, you can plan ahead for that too. While you're laying bags, setting in conduit is an easy way to give you access to pull water or power lines through later. We even developed a special exterior outlet cleat that lets you bring power from the inside of the building to the outside when you're ready. On our solar shed, we had large diameter conduit put in where we knew our solar panel array and AC in and out power would go, and even our mini split in the solar shed was planned with an extra large cleat and a perfectly measured hole for the copper lines, drain tube, and communication cables to go through.
But at the end of the day, if you have to make a hole through this wall, while it will be hard, it is doable. We actually chopped a 4-inch hole through the Casa de Caca when we added the dryer vent, and we've pushed larger diameter conduit through other parts of earthbag walls via drills, chisels, and hammers.
All I have to say, it is 100% possible to build an earthbag building with all the amenities that you would expect in a normal house. You just gotta think outside the box a little bit and plan ahead.
So you may be wondering, where the heck do we get these Hyperadobe bags?
Right, so these are made by Volm Company. They have their roots in farm supplies all the way back to 1954. Over the years, they've grown to make all kinds of mesh bags for food, pet products, landscape, erosion control, and now earth bags.
Volm's Hyperadobe bags are by far the best quality Hyperadobe bags you can get. This year, in 2026, we started working with Volm to start selling the bags at hyperadobe.com. Now, anyone can easily pay online and have them shipped directly to their door.
We have lots of big plans for Hyperadobe.com, but for now it's pretty simple. You can go there, learn about Hyperadobe. It's even got a calculator so you can calculate exactly how many rolls you need for your project. Buy online with a credit card. We will forward your order to Volm and they will ship it directly to you. Also, if you download the PDF of this guide, there's a coupon code in there. You can save 5% off your Hyperadobe order, which is pretty exciting.
It is exciting, Ben.
And with that, the Hyperadobe Safety and Design 101 class is finally complete.
It's a lot of talking.
Whew.
If you stayed with us this far, you get an A+ and a gold star.
Congratulations. Now, in all seriousness, we do hope that this information gives you the tools you need to design and build your own Hyperadobe dream home or planter or wall or bench. Listen, there's so much you can do with Hyperadobe.
Mm-hmm. You know what we should do?
What?
Build a pizza oven.
We should.
Next time.
Next time. In the meantime, we hope that you'll subscribe so you can see us finish our Hyperadobe Roundhouse. Of course, we'll be sharing lots more Hyperadobe tips and projects.
Yeah, and we even have other alternative builds coming up, like our Lavacrete Utility Lodge.
Very excited about that.
Yeah.
So, anyway, guys, we'll see you soon.